All right, let's dive into something pretty incredible. Today we're tackling a huge question in neuroscience. How does psilocybin, the compound in magic mushrooms, actually physically rewire our brains? We're going to take a look inside some amazing new research that's finally starting to give us some answers.
So here's the central mystery, right? The thing that has scientists totally fascinated. You have a substance that your body clears out in just a few hours, but its therapeutic effects, especially for something like major depression, can stick around for an incredibly long time. This is clearly not just a temporary high. Something much deeper, something structural, has to be going on. So, what is it?
To start cracking this puzzle, let's begin right where the scientists did, with the really surprising results they've been seeing in clinical studies.
The thing that kicks this whole investigation off is what's coming out of these clinical trials. Again and again, they're finding that a single supported session with psilocybin can lead to this really rapid and sustained relief from depression. And that suggests the drug is kicking off some kind of long-term biological change. It's not just painting over the cracks, it's more like it's helping the brain actually rebuild the wall.
And that brings us to the leading hypothesis for how this is even possible. The idea that psilocybin is literally, physically rewiring the brain's circuits.
The key concept here is called structural neuroplasticity. Now, I know it sounds a little complex, but think of it this way. Your brain isn't a fixed piece of hardware. It's more like a dynamic, living circuit board where connections can be strengthened, weakened, or even grown from scratch. This research suggests psychedelics are a powerful catalyst for this kind of physical remodeling.
And the search for these changes leads us to a very specific location, the frontal cortex. This part of your brain, right behind your forehead, is basically the command center for all your high-level thinking, decision-making, even your personality. It's the brain's CEO, and it looks like this is where the major rewiring is happening.
Okay, so to understand how a circuit gets rewired, you have to know the components, right? And in the cortex, there are two star players we really need to meet. They're called IT neurons and PT neurons. And honestly, the easiest way to think about them is this. The IT neurons are the local communicators. They form these dense, chatty networks with their immediate neighbors, just keeping the conversation flowing right there inside the cortex. The PT neurons, on the other hand, they're the long-distance messengers. Their whole job is to take info from the cortex and send it way out to other, deeper parts of the brain.
And this diagram just illustrates the difference perfectly. You can see the IT neurons there in purple and notice how their connections form these local loops. But then look at the PT neuron in yellow with its super long axon stretching way down to carry signals far, far away. These two types of cells just handle information in totally different ways.
So, now that we've met the key players, we can get to the real heart of the discovery. What exactly is psilocybin doing to these circuits?
And what's so fascinating is that the change isn't just random. Psilocybin doesn't simply turn up the volume on everything. Instead, it selectively adjusts the strength of the inputs that are coming into both the local IT and the long-distance PT neurons, but it adjusts each of them differently.
Let's look at the most dramatic changes, which all happen to those long-distance messenger neurons. So the input they get from brain networks involved in perception and self-awareness, that gets a massive 27% boost. But at the same time, the input from the sensory motor network gets turned down by over 14%. It's almost like a sound engineers and they're remixing the brain, boosting the treble and cutting the bass. So this is the crucial point, the main takeaway. The drug's biggest structural impact is on the brain's long-range communication pathways. By specifically changing the inputs to these PT neurons, psilocybin is fundamentally altering how the brain's command center talks to the rest of the brain. It's a really targeted intervention.
And you might be asking, how in the world do we know any of this? Well, it takes some truly incredible technology. Scientists use these amazing techniques, like using modified viruses to trace individual neural pathways, lighting them up with fluorescent proteins so they can see them. These glowing pathways let researchers create these absolutely breathtaking, detailed maps of the brain's wiring diagram, what they call the connectome. It is painstaking work, for sure, but it lets them see, neuron by neuron, exactly who is talking to whom.
So when we talk about rewiring the brain, it's not just a cool metaphor. These images are showing the physical connections, the actual biological wires that are being strengthened or weakened. This is what allows for totally new patterns of thought and feeling to emerge.
Okay, so how does all this circle back to our original question? How does this very specific kind of rewiring actually help treat something like depression?
Let's sum up the key takeaways here. First, the long-lasting antidepressant effects seem to be tied to actual physical changes in the brain. Second, these changes are super specific, targeting those long-distance messenger neurons. Third, this whole process is more like a retuning than a simple reboot. Some connections get stronger, others get weaker. And finally, the thinking is that this targeted rewiring helps to break up those rigid, negative, looping thought patterns we see in depression, creating a window for new, healthier pathways to form.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. We are just at the very beginning of understanding the brain's wiring diagram at this level of detail. As we get better and better at mapping these circuits, what could it mean for the future of mental health care if we can understand exactly which connections to tune to promote well-being? The implications are just truly profound.